jump right into it. Just kind of as a recap, we're talking about the parables. It's been a bit since we started. So, what is a parable? Story. Yep. It is a simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. In the Greek, it's parabolo. It means to place beside another in order to compare. And as always, we're going to examine the parables that we're talking about in that same compare and contrast manner. So let's jump in. Last time we talked about the parable of the sower. We learned that it kind of taught us to look at our own heart, our own soil, and examine it and kind of fit us into one of those categories and see where we were at. This week, we're going to look at more parables that involve soil, and we're going to see this interesting reoccurring phrase come up: the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like. So it's a neat little thing. We can use that as one of these compare and contrast ideas. So let's jump in. Matthew 13, starting in verse 24. He presented to them another parable, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while the men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. Now when the stalk sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also appeared. So the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, 'Master, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Then where did the weeds come from?' But he replied, 'An enemy did this.' Now the slave said to him, 'Do you want us then to go out and gather them up?' But he says, 'No, for while you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At harvest time, I will tell the reapers, first gather up the weeds and tie them in bundles to burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" So that's the parable. That's the whole parable. So let's look at the different components of the parable. So we see a bunch of different things that are kind of listed in the parable. 1, the kingdom of heaven. 2, the sower. 3, the field. We see seed mentioned, servants, the enemy, wheat, tares, harvest, and reapers. These are the main components that's going on in this parable. So to kind of understand the parable, first we need to find out what's going on with these different categories. But the great part about this one is, later on in the same chapter of Matthew, Yeshua explains this parable. So let's look at what he said about it. "Then he sent the crowds away and went into the house. His disciples came to him, saying, 'Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field.' He answered, 'The one sowing the good seed is the Son of Man. And the field is the world. And the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. And the weeds are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Therefore, just as the weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." So this is Yeshua's explanation of the parable. So let's do this. Let's take the components. These are the components that we just talked about. These are what's going on. And let's kind of define out what Yeshua said about them. First, the kingdom of heaven. He really didn't explain in this parable. We're going to look at that in a minute. So the sower is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The seed is the sons of the kingdom. The servants, he really doesn't explain who these servants represent in the parable. We're going to talk about that. The enemy is the enemy. We know who the enemy is. The enemy is Satan, Hasatan, the devil. The wheat is the sons of the kingdom, because that's who sprouts eventually from the seed that's sown. Tares are the sons of Hasatan, that's the weeds. Harvest represents the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. So, let's look at each one of these little sections, and let's look at this. So, what is the kingdom of heaven? So, what is the kingdom of heaven? Because he says that's the first thing. That represents the kingdom of heaven. So, the kingdom of heaven is like. So, that's the first thing we need to know is what is the kingdom of heaven? So, the word kingdom in the Greek is basileia, and it means realm of a king's authority, denotes rulership and control. So, with this starting out saying the kingdom of heaven is like, so we can say that everything in this parable is therefore being compared to Yah's realm of authority. Then we see the Son of Man. So who is the Son of Man? Yeshua. Yeah, that's not a trick question. Okay. Mark 8:38, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And then in John, it says, no one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And we know that's a reference to Yeshua being lifted up on the cross. So we know that the Son of Man is Yeshua. So the world. What is the world? It says the field, he said the field is the world.
So all of humanity, mankind?
Yeah, so in the Greek, there's two words that are a lot of times used that people get mixed up in translations. And it's earth and world. World and earth. And earth is the physical matter. Usually when we see the word earth in Scripture, it's the physical matter that we live on. But the world speaks of our social and our environmental construct. So it's all of humanity. It's everything that's on top of the earth. Then we have sons of the kingdom. So who are the sons of the kingdom?
Those who believe.
Yeah.
Follow Yahweh.
So what does a son do? A son is one who carries out the will of his father. Right? John 6 says, for I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but do the will of the Father who sent me. So in this verse we see Yeshua demonstrating to us how we can be sons. By carrying out the will, right? Then John 13:35 says, by this everyone that will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And that's basically what Yeshua was doing on the earth, was training up sons. Discipleship is a picture type of father and son. And then, of course, he told them they'll know you're a son if you have love for one another. And we all know that 1 John 5 tells us what love is. By this we know we love the children of God, when we love God and obey His commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments. And His commandments are not burdensome. So, who are the sons of the kingdom? The sons of the kingdom are those who shema, who hear and obey the commandments of God. Then there's the tares. The tares. So what are tares? Most translations translate weeds.
Yeah, but there's something specific about tares.
Yes, weeds is a very poor translation of the word tares.
I remember learning that a tare, when it was very young and as it was growing, looked like wheat. So it was very difficult to tell them apart. And
yes.
It wasn't until the end.
So in the Greek, it is zazanium, which is a grass that looks like wheat. But I found some interesting things out about tares studying this out. And this was pretty interesting. Of all the species of grasses, this is the one most resembling wheat and has been supposed to be degenerated wheat.
Oh, so like it was wheat
The word degenerate means having lost the physical, mental, or moral qualities considered normal and desirable, showing evidence of decline.
So it's wheat that like dead fell away.
So it potentially was once actual wheat that, whether through cross-pollination or whatever, has lost its original wheat properties.
That takes a whole new way.
Yeah. And then on the near approach of harvest, it would have been carefully weeded out from among the wheat by women and children. Interesting to note, even though it's degenerated wheat, it has no nutritional value to humans and is usually used as fodder for animals.
Which is just like a fill in their feet, right?
It's just been something they added to their food. Like, we can't do anything with this, feed it to the animals.
Yeah, go feed to the chicken.
Yep. So that's tares. That's kind of an overview of what tares are. So then we get to this idea of the end of the age. And what is the end of the age?
I mean, I imagine. Sorry, I'm answering. Does someone else like to answer?
End of the age.
The end of the world as we know it.
It's the end of the world as we know it. Yep. So,
Jesus is coming back.
if you look up this phrase in the Greek, it means a completion of time. It means when all things are completed. Which made me think of Matthew 5, when he says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." That's the end of the age. Once everything in Scripture has been accomplished, fulfilled, and it's complete, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
So at the end of the age is when this harvest is taking place.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why people don't see that.
I
just don't get it.
Yes. It's one of those
Well,
scriptures.
Because after you showed me on now, I can't not think about it.
Well, and it's like, to me, it's like one of those things where it's like Sabbath. When people are reading the Ten Commandments, they just kind of like, oh, they forget to even talk about Sabbath. Well, it's the same thing I feel like with scriptures like this. People will read Matthew 5, 1 through 16, and then they're at 24, and you're like, whoa, well, you missed a whole section. It's like their eyes are blinded to it. They don't even see it there.
Well, or they read it and it just read on by.
Yes.
Like, I know, I've read that my whole life.
Yeah.
And just read on by.
Yep. Well, and there's like you said, if we haven't built our foundation in Torah, then to read that and not be thinking of Torah, you'll just read right over it and not even pay it any mind.
That makes sense.
And then there's also people that read verse 18 until everything is accomplished, and they put that onto Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not everything. Yeah, that's not everything.
Yeah.
Like, there's still so
Heaven
much
and earth
more
are
that has
still
to
here.
take place. Yeah. Heaven and earth are still here. There's still letters that are there. Nothing's disappeared yet.
And then you have to go, okay, so what will we rule under in eternity with the Father? You think he's just going to be like, okay, it's okay to do all these awful things now? No, I remember learning that it's an idiom. It basically means like when hell freezes over. Like it's not
It's
happening.
not going to happen.
It's not happening. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah. So, let's jump back in to the portion. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of break down some more of these little sections in here. And then after we break these down, we're going to kind of tie it all back together and kind of look at this whole thing as a lump. So, back at the front. So, he presented to them another parable saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while the men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away." So, the enemy came when the guard was down. 1 Peter says, "Stay alert, watch out, your adversary the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, searching for someone to devour." When we're asleep, we're not on guard. We're not alert. We're not seeing what's going on. Revelation 16:15, "Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. And I thought it was interesting that he says, stay awake, keeping his garments on. And immediately I thought of Passover.
Right.
Eat the meal,
and
clothed, with your loins girded, with your shoes on, ready to go. Being alert, being vigilant. Always, always, always. Because just as it talks about the enemy coming in the night, what does it say in Revelation? He's coming in the night as well. So we have to be on alert and on guard, not only just for what the enemy could potentially do, but be alert and on guard for his return and be ready. Now when the stalk sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also appeared. Which is interesting because now we see this span of time to where both the tares and the wheat were sown, but the tares were kind of hidden because it takes time for stuff to grow. And it made me think of gardening. When you're in gardening, everything has a different germination period. Some things germinate in 30 days. Some days germinate in 60 days. Some take 90 days to germinate before you even see a sprout. But then even after you see a sprout, there's thing called new leaves, and there's a thing called true leaves. When a seed first sprouts, it produces new leaves. It's the tiny little new leaves, just so it can start getting sunlight to help get nutrients to produce the plant. But a lot of seeds, new leaves, all look the same. When things first sprout, sometimes you're like, oh, if you don't label it, it's like, oh man, what did I plant here? Because this looks a lot like this over here. And until those true leaves come out, you don't know what that plant is. So this takes time. So tares can be hidden amongst us for a while before we notice it. So the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Master, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Then where did the weeds come from? But he replied, an enemy did this. Now the slaves say to him, do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he says, no, for while you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At harvest time, I will tell the reapers, first gather up the weeds, tie them in bundles, and burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn. Then, this is interesting. So when he jumps over into when he tells you what it means, he says, then he sent the crowds away and went into the house. So he told the crowd this whole parable, and then he said, go away. And he went to the house with his disciples. And it was only his disciples that came to him and said, hey, explain this to us. So again, I pointed that out to remind us, like, we have to be close to Yah and in his proximity to get understanding sometimes. So he answered, the one sowing the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world, and the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one.
I'm gonna steal this food or two.
So I was thinking about that when he's talking about the two sons. So we've got sons of the kingdom and sons of the evil one, and it made me think of the scripture that says no man can serve two masters. Like, you don't get to be a son of the kingdom and a son of the evil one. You get to be one or the other. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, just as the weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man sent out his angels, and they will weed out his kingdom, everything that causes sin and who do evil. So I brought this verse back up because most translations read this way. He will weed out everything that causes sin and all who do evil. But the Tree of Life and the Complete Jewish Bible word this slightly different, and it is more accurate translation. They say, the Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who practice lawlessness. Now the word stumbling block means offense, to trip up. But what I find interesting is that's the exact word that they described Yeshua as. in 1 Corinthians. But we proclaim Messiah crucified, a stumbling block to Jewish people and foolishness to Gentile people. So that was interesting.
So in that case, it is stumbling blocks, though, that are keeping people from the word. Like, not in the case where Yeshua was trying to tell them the truth and they couldn't handle it.
So I was looking at this two different ways. One, that way, where it was people that are becoming stumbling blocks from the truth. And then I also thought that maybe possibly this scripture is going in more of a compare and contrast, where that's the two divisions. People who are stumbling blocks in the sense like Yeshua was, that they're trying to share the word, and then you have those that are practicing lawlessness. Because in that case, they would be diametrically opposed. I mean, polar opposites. Lawlessness, and then the stumbling blocks.
What is the verse that comes after that? So it says, he sent forth his angels, and they were gathered out of his kingdom, all stumbling blocks, and those who practice lawlessness. So then what happens?
Oh, we just read it.
Is there anything else, anyone else listed that the angels...
No, that's it. Because then it talks about them gathering them and them getting thrown into the fiery furnace.
But the first one says everything that causes sin.
Yeah.
So that would not be a good stumbling block.
Correct, yeah.
So I wonder, did you look at the Greek?
Yeah, the Greek of that is the Greek is stumbling block. It just means offense, to trip up. It doesn't necessarily mean sin. Correct.
Sin.
It does not necessarily mean sin. That's the way that the NIV, the ESV, a bunch of them translate it.
Kind of like yeast can be both sin and
correct.
good.
You can have
like
good yeast, bad yeast.
It has duality again.
Yes.
Because it wouldn't be Hebrew.
That's what I'm saying. I think there's definitely, it could be both in this instance. It could be very much a compare and contrast where they're opposites, or it could be lumping them both into kind of the same thing. But continuing on with that word lawlessness there, I think we all know this by now, is anomia, lawlessness, disobedience, sin. But when we really get down to it, it's disregard for the commandments of Yah. But what's interesting is as I was studying this out, I was reading another book, not even part of this study when I was studying this, and it talked about this verse. And one of the more modern scholars was talking about that word lawlessness, and this is how they defined it. Distance from the Torah. I was like, that is amazing. I love that. That lawlessness is distance from the Torah, which took me to Matthew 24. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. And if you take that and kind of rework it with that other definition, people's love will grow cold and wickedness will abound when people distance themselves from the Torah.
Sure. Accurate.
And think about over the last few decades, the increase of wickedness in the church. I mean, it just seems to have gotten worse and worse and worse, and this progressive Christianity has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And with this verse, you understand why. Because as people distance themselves from the Torah, wickedness is going to abound. The love of many is going to grow colder. And the verse says, at the end of the age, these are the people that are going to get separated out. But he who endures to the end will be saved. They will throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. And I love that they put that word righteous in there, because it really shows that righteousness is the opposite of anomia. Like lawlessness is the opposite, the antithesis of righteousness. So when the tares are gathered up, what remains is the righteous sons of the kingdom. When all that stuff is gathered up and it's separated out, what remains is the righteous sons of the kingdom. It's interesting that between this parable and then the disciples coming and asking for the explanation, there's a couple more parables in between that all start with the kingdom of heaven is like. So I just wanted to read those real quick before we kind of wrap this up and talk about the final kind of meaning of this. So in verse 31, if you continue on after he gives the initial parable, he says, he presents to them another parable, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, yet when it's full grown, it's greater than the other herbs. It becomes like a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like chametz, or leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. So in these two, we see that the kingdom of heaven starts small, but grows into an impactful force that affects the environment around it. So it starts small, but it grows into something that birds can land in, that people can partake of. So let's look at one more parable. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea, gathering things of every kind. Then it was filled. They pulled it ashore, and they sat down and gathered up the good into containers, but threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth and separate the wicked from among the righteous, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this parable right here, and then the one we're talking about, the wheat and the tares, the way these end is the biggest, it's probably the biggest reason, like, when people come and ask me, hey, if somebody's doing such and so or not doing such and so, is this sin? Are they going to make it into heaven? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's not my responsibility. He's going to judge at the end. Yep. He's gathering all the wheat and the tares and separating them. He's casting out the dragnet and dragging everything in and separating it on shore. He gets to decide that. I'm just going to tell you what the truth is. I'm just going to tell you what the word says. Then you can go work that out with him. I'm not going to be the one to say, no, you're living, this is wrong, you're going to hell. That's not me. He can deal with that at the end.
It's funny, I can see that because we use dragnets when I used to work for the marine fisheries.
Oh, yeah.
And it was funny because, you sit there and pull and you're fishing for one thing, but you catch all these other things inside the net. And so you're on the deck and you're just, I can just see Yeshua sitting here. You're not here, you're not here, you're not here, you're not here.
It just takes a load off, because I don't want to be God.
Yeah.
I just know I want to do what it says. I don't want to toe the line to see how much I can get away with and still get it. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing that really gets me, too. When people are like, oh, do I have to do that? Why not? Oh, why not? Why not? If it means the possibility of securing your eternity, why not? Why not? It's like, it's God's love language. Show them some love. Was it?
I said they're lazy.
Yeah.
We are lazy.
Yeah.
I remember somebody in high school talking to a pastor of ours and was like, so how much can I do?
How much sin can I sin
before I don't get into heaven? And the pastor looked at him and was like, Why are you asking me that? What are you trying to get away with doing?
Exactly.
And they were like, I don't know.
They probably had it in their head what they wanted to do.
Yeah, they did.
And they wanted to push it to the limit.
Yeah.
Because some people do that. How much can I get away with?
Right, because it comes back to they love themselves more than they love the Lord.
Yeah.
Isn't that a thing? You'll become lovers of selves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then after the disciples come to him and ask him for an explanation, he gives them an explanation for all these things he said. Then he says, have you understood all these things? They said to him, yes. Then he said to them, therefore, every Torah scholar discipled for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure both new things and old. Both new things and old. And I love this because this is what we're doing. We're becoming scholars of the Torah. We're becoming disciples of the Torah. We are learning what the word says, what Yah's instructions are. And he says, therefore, every Torah scholar discipled for the kingdom of heaven, which is what we're doing, is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure both new things and old. And this word brings out in the Greek means dealeth out. And then he says of new things and old things. So there's this idea that there's old truths that have been since the beginning that we are able to give out in new forms, aspects, applications, and with new illustrations. So we're able to take, because we are becoming scholars of the Torah, we're able to take the principles found in the Torah, in Yah's instructions, and give them out to people in new ways and in new forms so that they can apply it to their lives, into our culture, into how we operate. And that's the whole point of what we're doing, is we're taking what's the original, we're pulling it out of their cultural context and saying, okay, how do we apply this to us today? Which I think is cool. He's like, hey, look, did you understand? Good, because you're about to have to take this out and go spread it. And think about what he's getting ready to send them to do. He's getting ready to send them out. They're getting ready to get sent out from him into new cultures, into new areas, into new environments, and they're going to need this Torah to be able to put it into these new cultures that they're getting ready to go to, which is neat. So, let's take this parable with all this extra information, all this extra knowledge, all this extra insight that we just got, and I basically reworded it and added context and understanding to it. This is what I came up with. The authority and rule of heaven carried out by Yeshua is carried out by establishing righteous men in the world by deed and thought. But in the night, a time of darkness and slumber, Hasatan attempts to establish his rule among the righteous men by degenerating the original commandments of Yah, doing so through subtle thoughts and deeds. As men mature and grow, the source of their supply is made evident. So the servants of Yeshua asked what they should do. Yeshua told them that Hasatan had also infiltrated the world with his thoughts and ideas, and if they attempt to remove them, they risk injuring the righteous men. So here is what you should do. Let both the righteous and lawless grow together. Allow the kingdom of heaven to have an impact on the world around it. Once all is completed that needs to be completed, I will send my angels out as harvesters to gather everyone up for a final judgment where I will separate the righteous and those who have separated themselves from the Torah. Some will say to me, Lord, Lord, but I will separate those without Torah from amongst my kingdom. So do not worry about the lawless, for they will always be there. Keep growing and have ears to hear, so you can be separated unto my kingdom.
Wow. That's good.
And that's what it sums up. And that's why it's important for us to be Torah scholars, so that we can have an impact on the degenerated wheat, the tares around us, and have an impact. Who knows? It doesn't say in this, but maybe that degenerated wheat gets regenerated through us being Torah scholars. Any questions? Comments, concerns, criticisms?
I wish it was longer.
What?
The teaching.
Yeah.
It's good, honey. It's my only criticism with overtures.
I know. Some
I'm
of
used to
the,
those 62 slides.
I know. I try not to, go crazy.
No, these are little bite sizes.
Yeah. But, yeah. So that was a good one. I had a fun time studying that one out. There was a lot of good stuff in that. But yeah, so I think really it boils down to sometimes there's not anything we can do about the tares. And there's going to be tares in our life. There's going to be tares that aggravate us, that grow up right alongside of us.
Could be your family.
Yeah. But it's going to be, but what's our responsibility? Keep growing. Keep being wheat. Keep studying, becoming Torah scholars so that we can give out these old commandments in new forms and new ways that others can implement them